Welcome to episode 5 of season 5 of the Filmmaker Film Watcher podcast. I'm filmmaker Richard Di Gregorio.
And I continue to be film watcher Greg Ralph.
So this episode
is named after a film that I've never actually seen. Planes, Trains and Automobiles.
Yes, I've never seen it either.
Oh.
No, so I don't know why we didn't do this film.
I just assumed you had. This would be
I actually hadn't.
This would be kind of a quasi-confession.
Yeah, I know. So, but this is the Planes, Trains and Automobiles episode where we're going to be talking about, obviously, 3 films with planes, trains and automobiles.
Yep, one each.
So the first film we're going to be discussing is the 1980 film Flying High.
Also known as?
Airplane.
Yes, depending on where you are in the world.
That's right.
And then we're going to go to the 1926 silent Buster Keaton film, The General.
Which is a train.
Yeah. let's really belabor the point, shall we?
That's right, we should.
Oh gosh, have we got an automobile film by any
Yes, we do. And our third film, the automobile film, is we are looking at 1971's Duel.
Duel, not as in Jewel of the Nile.
Perfect.
Yes.
That's great.
Which actually wouldn't be a bad film. I copyrighted that, okay, just so you know.
Duel of the Nile.
Yeah. So we should get straight into it.
Sure.
Like all forms of transport, we hope to send you on transports of delight.
Let's get it moving.
Yes, so Ricardo, let's take off with Flying High or Airplane or insert title of your choice.
Flying High, or as some of the world knows it as Airplane, is a hilarious 1980 American parody comedy. Some people believe this film to be one of the funniest movies of all time. With 3 directors, Jim Abrahams and brothers David and Jerry Zucker, who went on to make the Naked Gun franchise, Flying High makes a lot of fun spoofing disaster movies such as 1957's 0 Hour and the 1970s films Airport and Airport 1975. After being dumped by his long-term girlfriend and air hostess Elaine Dickinson, Julie Haggerty, ex-Navy pilot Ted Stryker, Robert Hayes, is hell-bent on making things right so they can both be together again. As Elaine boards a flight, Ted decides to buy a ticket on the same flight, even though he's been nervous about flying ever since an incident during the war. However, when many passengers suddenly get seriously ill due to a bad fish meal, he has no chance to get her. With the pilots now ill, Ted Stryker seems to be the only healthy person aboard that has piloting experience. So takes control, doing the best he can to save everybody and the relationship he desperately wants to continue. So that's the plot. But that's really not the greatest thing about this movie, for it's mostly known for its surreal humour and fast-paced slapstick comedy, complete with visual and verbal gags that come thick and fast. You can't even get through the credits without a gag when the character of Worst Boy is said to have been played by Adolf Hitler. The screenplay is just so chock full of humour that you really can't pick it all up in one sitting. The cast is all good. Even legendary basketballer Kareem Abdul-Jabbar as the sidekick pilot does well. Look, I am a fan of this movie. I watched this film quite a bit when I was younger, and I thought it would have dated terribly. And while, yes, there are plenty of race jokes that wouldn't fare too well today, it does tend to poke fun at everyone. And as I said, there are so many moments in here, from the air hostess saying, "All right, everyone, get in crash positions," which then cuts away to everybody in literal crash positions, to verbal gags like, "We have clearance, Clarence. Roger, Roger. Who's our vector, Victor?" And the classic, I'm not doing this very well, and one of the most famous ones, delivered perfectly by the wonderful Leslie Nielsen, who plays Dr. Rumek. "Can you fly in this plane and land it?" he asks. "Surely you can't be serious," says Ted. "I am serious," says the doctor, "and don't call me Shirley." It's just classic.
And they're such good jokes, they keep coming back to them.
They really keep coming back to them. They really do. I really love the film. And like I said, there's so much going on and so much to listen to, even like background audio that you shouldn't be listening to, but you do hear it, and then suddenly they're having an argument. These two
PA announcers
or
tannoy,
like, you know, just just things like that all the way through it. Like, I really can't think of another film that is so jam-packed full of comedy. But Greg, what are your thoughts?
Well, it's one of those shows where if you don't get something, and there are a couple of things I didn't get. There are two jokes that apparently the Zucker brothers were disappointed no one got, and I don't get them, about a spear being thrown into the wall chart.
I didn't get that either.
And the falling watermelon.
Yeah, I didn't get it either.
Something, but it doesn't matter if you don't get something.
Doesn't matter.
Wait a nanosecond, you've got the next one you're trying to process.
Absolutely.
Like
Everything's a skit.
It's go, 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 go.
Yeah.
And the amazing thing about this film, as you and I were talking about just before, is most of the script, except for all the jokes, is actually lifted directly from another film.
Yeah.
So 0 Hour, made in 1957, is the exact same story. It's not his girlfriend who's the stewardess on the flight. It's his wife and son, the strange wife and son, that he follows onto the plane. But it's pretty much almost a cut and paste. And then they could just put all these jokes in, visual and word jokes, as you say. So the background to it is that these three had made the Kentucky Fried Movie, and which was kind of a parody of TV shows and ads. And they accidentally taped 0 Hour one night when they would leave the VCR running overnight to record
we all did
late night ads, so that they could then work out good parodies. And they picked up this movie without quite meaning to, and obviously just started having fun with it. And they originally wrote this to be a B movie with ad breaks, but the feedback they got as they wrote it from people was that the ads actually took away from the main part of the story, which was the film, and to stick with that. And that's exactly what they've done. Now, they were a bit concerned. They were legally advised that because they're doing parody, they basically reuse the script.
Yeah.
But they were concerned they might get in trouble, so they actually bought the rights towards Zero so they could do this. And we will put a link in our show notes to a really great comparison side-by-side of the two films that goes about 14, 15 minutes.
Yeah,
where
it's
you
really
can
good.
see exactly how they're just parroting the script but dumping these jokes in. Like it's and that actually increases my admiration for it. You know, a lot of people, including myself, when this film came out and even since, have always just assumed that it was a parody of the disaster films of the 70s.
Yeah, absolutely. Even the Poseidon Adventure or...
Terry Inferno, Earthquake, Poseidon Adventure,
that's right.
Airport 75, Airport 77, Airport 80, the Concorde that had come out just before this.
That's right.
And while it certainly references those, so
it's
there's the
0
Girl
Hour
and the Singing Nun from 75. You've got Jimmy Walker, who plays a character in Airport 80, the Concorde, who does the service on the windscreen and the engine of the plane before they take off. There's always little echoes of those, but it's actually really pointing back to 0 Hour. Now, you were only 3 when this film came out.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't have seen it probably until it came out on video, and you watched it.
I actually mostly saw it on television.
On television, okay.
Yeah, so it was usually a taped. Yeah, that's right, with real ads. So I'd watch it with ads, and we taped that, and that's the version I watched. That was a lot of the movies I was watching at that time were all the TV versions.
Well, I was a grown up just when this came out, and I can remember really clearly going to see another film, and the trailer came on for Flying High. And it was hilarious, just the trailer. And the audience was in stitches with some of these sight gags that were, again, like the movie, were just thrown pell-mell at you. And sometimes when you see a comedy trailer and you think, oh, this is great, and all the good jokes are in the trailer, and the rest is kind of, this is not one of those films.
It's not one of those films. It really does go from the first frame when they do a Jaws parody.
Yes, which was in the trailer.
But to the end, it's going at 100 miles an hour.
And at the end, you mean the guy sitting in the cab?
Yes.
Well, do you know who that guy was?
Who was that?
I thought it was actually Henny Youngman, one of the early comedians, and I'm fabulously wrong about that, but I looked it up. And he was some guy who was responsible for putting through cuts in funding of public schools around that time, I think in California.
Yeah.
And so the joke was, it's hidden to you and I.
Yeah.
But the joke was that he's the guy who saved the state taxes all this money, and he's sitting in this taxi that's just ticking over. It was up to like $13,000.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
I just want to pick you up on one thing. I'm not sure if you said it just now or when we were talking beforehand, but we were talking about the fact that it's called Airplane in America.
Yes.
And for reasons I don't understand, here and maybe elsewhere it was called Flying High. So you and I and our friends and so on,
it's always been
this film is
Flying High.
And you were saying, I think before we sat down, that it's called Airplane everywhere else in the world. Well, in fact, it's not, because I kept coming across all these different names of what it's called around the world, the translations. I haven't got all of them, but in Germany, it's called The Incredible Trip in a Crazy Airplane. In Finland, it's called Hey, We're Flying. Brazil, Tighten Your Seatbelts, the pilot has gone.
Wow.
Which sounds like a disaster film. Poland, Is the Pilot Flying With Us? Italy, The Craziest Plane in the World. You'll do better than I can. L'aero più pazzo del mondo.
Oh, you did all right.
Thank you. And Spain, it's called Land As You Can. So, interesting. Now, another thing that you and I had just briefly alluded to, and we try not to talk about these before we sit down, but we're just talking about Steven Stucker, who plays Johnny, the very camp character in the Air Traffic Control.
Yes.
And you were saying how much...
I was laughing at him every time I saw him.
He's actually the weak point in the film for me.
No.
With the exception of the joke about turning off the landing lights, which I think is very funny. And in the film itself comes at the point when the plane's coming to land, so the tension, such as it is really high. There's lots of jokes coming at you, boom, 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 at this point. And that's one of them, and it added to the hilarity. But even back in 1980, when I first saw this, and maybe more now, I find his character actually one of the weak points, a bit wearing. He was, I think, the only person who was ad-libbing in the film. It was a very tight script.
Yeah, right.
But he was given permission to ad-lib. And I've read some commentary that says having a character in a 1980 film who's quite obviously gay and is having fun at the expense of everyone else rather than being the butt of the joke was groundbreaking. And I can absolutely respect that. And I can get why that happened. I just didn't find it funny.
Yeah. Oh, I did. I quite liked the character. I thought that was quite a strength in the film. We did. Nin and I were both laughing.
Yeah.
Quite extensively at it.
Well, I sat down with my wife and to watch it, and I thought, is this going to be dated? And
that's exactly what I thought.
And some bits have dated, or the references are lost, like the coffee ads that they're sending out, which were really big in the 70s.
Yes.
And in fact, that woman who's playing that wife was the woman from the ads, it turns out.
Oh, right.
Which I hadn't realised. And the jokes about people like Gerald Ford and Anita Bryant.
Yes.
And even a blackface Indian character.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
We've moved on from a lot of that.
We have. Like I said, there are some race jokes in there.
But it stands up well.
Yeah.
And the bit that made my wife laugh loud early on was when Ted Stryker's on the plane and he's telling his backstory to the different characters who all become suicidal.
They all become suicidal.
He's telling the first one to the sweet little old grandma, who, funnily enough, when you come back from the story, is obviously hung from the ceiling of the plane. It's just the old lady's shoes and feet down in embrace.
Yes.
And yet, weirdly enough, she comes back in the sequel. Not quite sure how that was supposed to happen.
Yeah, right. Wow. Okay.
But she's on the spacecraft in Flying High.
Oh, wow. I don't know that.
Do you think they call it Airplane too? They probably do. And, there are some crass jokes. And, there's that really gratuitous scene where there's naked breasts jiggling in front of the camera.
Oh, that is just so odd.
Yeah.
I remember that from when I was younger, obviously. It was just... But I remember this is an
educational film. It was the first time I ever heard a blowjob joke too.
Yeah, well, geez. That scene, wow. But the boobs just coming in, it just out of nowhere and then off screen. It's just... I find it really funny because it's just so out. Just what is that?
I saw a Kentucky Fried Movie a long, long, long time ago, probably in the 80s. And I remember it as being fairly crass in its own right. So that's kind of their background. But the rest of the film is actually highbrow and lowbrow, and that's kind of just crass.
It is, yeah.
And it kind of it weakens the film because you're really enjoying the film for its cleverness, and suddenly there's like a jiggling boob joke.
Boobs, yeah, that's right. No, I agree with that. But I mean, even the kids, when she's like, would you like cream? The kids, when she says, no, thank you, I take it black, like my men. That to me, I just went, ooh, for a long time, that was one of the endlessly quoted jokes, and that's one of the things about this film. Yeah.
Is that people just started quoting the lines over and over in different contexts.
Yeah.
I wrote down a list of 10 of them. A hospital, what is it? I take my coffee black like my men. Stewardess, I speak jive. And what I love about that, do you know who that is who gives that line?
Who is it?
That's Barbara Billingsley, whose claim to fame was she played the mother in the very nice domestic sitcom in the 50s, Leave It to Beaver.
Oh, was that her?
Yes.
Oh, wow. I love that show.
They originally tried to get Harriet Nelson from Ozzie and Harriet, which is an equally squeaky clean 50s domestic sitcom. The mother of Ricky Nelson, the singer-actor.
Oh, wow.
They couldn't get her, but they got Barbara Billingsley, and she does it so well.
She does.
And she shoot or whatever she says.
She's great.
Don't call me Shirley. My Drinking Problem.
Yep.
Assumed crass positions, like you say.
Yes.
The panicking woman who gets slapped repeatedly. And if you look carefully, that was actually her idea to really extend that sequence, that particular actress. And if you look carefully, the second person to slap her is Leslie Nielsen as the Doctor.
Oh, he's wonderful. He steals the show in this.
Well, this made his career.
Yeah,
he took in a whole new direction. He'd wanted to go in comedy. He wasn't seen that way. But because they got all these kind of, straight, drama kind of actors, and sort of manly men kind of actors. So you've got Robert Stack, you've got Leslie Nielsen, you've got Lloyd Bridges, you've got... they tried to get George Kennedy, who'd been on the airport films, and in the end he turned it down because he thought that would be bad karma with the producers of the airport films, with that studio.
Yep.
But then he felt so bad about it, he came back and did the Police Squad TV series for them with Leslie Nielsen. So you've got all these great actors. You've got the lipstick makeover stuff going on.
Oh, yes.
Crashing, played by the Zucker brothers' mother.
Yes.
And the jokes about autopilot and the jokes in the credits. These were all really big, early and throughout the 80s. They were part of social kind of, mucking around.
Yeah.
Throwing lines in. It was really
and I know that
seminal.
But Robert Hayes, I know he had a career.
He was making a big TV show at the time.
Yeah, right. But he's always Ted Stryker to me.
He's never going to be anything else.
No.
And in the same way for me, Julie Haggerty is always going to be Elaine, that kind of fragile... I've seen her in something else actually quite recently, and I just kept thinking, that's Elaine, just 30 years later. Wow. Ethel Merman's in it, in a great little cameo, playing herself. But we're playing a soldier who has delusions that he is Ethel Merman.
Yeah, but yes, that's right. Yes,
thinking there's show business.
Yeah,
and I kind of wondered if that was a little reference to Gloria Swanson from Airport 75 as well.
Oh, right,
where she played herself.
Yeah,
maybe not.
Oh, there's the. Would you like a little whiskey, ma'am? Certainly not. And then she's
snorting coke. Now, I have to tell you one thing I got very excited about because I like to kind of spot these little celebrity things and so on.
Yes.
This film, as per Helen Reddy in Airport 75. Has a singing nun. And they actually tried to get Helen Reddy to play this part, and again, studios got unhappy about it, so they couldn't get her. So they cast somebody else. Do you know who's playing the singing nun?
No.
It's Maureen McGovern. Do you know who that is?
No.
She had 2 big hits in the 70s, and I think she had a part in either or both films, from Towering Inferno and The Poseidon Adventure. She was a big name in the 70s from those disaster films.
Right, okay.
And the music. And here she's popping up as the singing nun. It's just a lovely touch.
Yeah.
And she gets to beat up the lady in the seat who's having hysterics.
Yeah. I just love it that she's reading Boy's Life and the boy's reading Nun's Life.
Yeah. And there was another magazine the pilot was reading, but we won't mention
we won't mention that one. Again, it's lowbrow, but it was clever.
Yeah. And the bit that made me laugh early on, when they were still in the airport, was when the captain, Peter Graves, picks up the phone to take the phone call from the Mayo Clinic, and there's that slightly laboured joke about, I'll take ham and old mayo on the line, whatever it was.
Yeah.
But when he goes to pick up the red phone and the loudspeaker says, no, the white phone.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, at the Mayo Clinic, you've got this heart jumping around.
On the doctor's
desk, yes. Which I'm pretty sure
the
was
heart
the original
specialist
as well.
Yeah, the heart specialist.
It's just, it was just silly, and that hasn't dated.
The silliness is so much fun in it. And I thought it would have dated as a lot more than it had, and it really hasn't.
Up. So this time around, I noticed something I never noticed before, which was some of the place names that are referenced. I think in the backstory, in the jungle and or the war story, 2 of the places are called Daiquiri and Drambuie, which are drinks.
Right. Drinks, yeah.
But again, and we know he's got a drinking problem.
Yes.
So there's all this stuff that you suddenly go, oh, I missed that last time, and I probably haven't seen the film as often as you have, but I've seen it quite a few times.
Yeah.
And there's always new
stuff. There's always new stuff because it's happening. They happen faster than you think you can cope with.
Now, I've got a couple of factoids for you.
Okay.
So Otto, the blow-up autopilot.
Yeah.
He has his own IMDb page.
Which
is pretty good. He's only got the one film.
He does not.
Look, I've got it here to show you. Look.
No way. You've got to be kidding me.
Right, and he's listed as actor. And his bio starts off saying, Otto is one of the most iconic movie objects of all time, not only recognised by audiences around the world for his only film performance in the massive hit Flying High, note the name, but he also has a profile page at IMDb along with other film cultural icons like Volleyball Wilson and Robbie the Robot, and it goes on. But I actually know what was the ultimate fate of that blow-up Otto doll.
What was the fate of...
Well, it languished for quite a few years in Jerry Zucker's garage and then eventually, sadly, disintegrated.
No!
Yes, I'm sorry.
Of course, it's plastic. It's going to disintegrate. Oh, poor Otto. Died.
R.I.P.
R.I.P.
Well, in his case, let it R.I.P.
Yeah, that's right. I feel pretty let down by that.
Boom, boom. Sorry, I might now get an overinflated sense of myself for knowing that. And just before we sort of move to our scores, one more little factoid to slip in.
Yep.
Which is that there was Flying High 2 or Airplane the sequel, again, depending where you are in the world. And you've seen that, haven't you?
I haven't seen the sequel.
Oh, I thought you had, sorry.
No.
I saw it when it came out on video, sort of mid-80s, and was very disappointed. I mean, they reuse a lot of the jokes from the first one, and I thought, But I thought I'd rewatch it before now to just sort of go back and remind myself what it was I didn't like about it. And actually, I enjoyed it a lot more the second time around. There were some good jokes in there once you realise they're reusing a lot of material. But the Zucker brothers and Abrahams didn't get involved in this film. And the studio had forgotten to lock them in for a sequel until it was too late. So they had no commitment.
Yeah, wow.
And they said, you know what? We've done airplane jokes. We're moving on to other stuff. But they wanted to do it. So they got a guy called Ken Finkelman to come in and write and direct the sequel. And one of his other claims to fame is they did the exact same thing with Ken Finkelman when Grease was a big hit and they had no sequel. So he also did Grease 2.
Oh, really?
A very good film.
Hang on a minute. But, I know a few people that actually love Grease 2.
Okay.
And said, no, the music's great and it's really good.
Song.
Huh?
Sing me a song from Grease 2.
I don't know. Yeah, I know, but that's
probably
a lot of
Summer Living.
I know some people like it.
Grease Frightening. I don't know. All right. So what are you going to give this film?
I'm giving it 8 out of 10.
Well, so am I, actually.
Yeah.
I think some parts are dated. You and I obviously disagree about Steven Stucker and his performance. For me, that is a weak point.
Yeah.
But, it just instantly became an endlessly quoted classic. And that's such a great sign.
It is.
Of a film that, again, as I've said a few times before, it sets itself a target and it just goes right out and it nails it.
It does.
If that's not a mixed metaphor.
No.
And I also now appreciate it more, realising how much they just basically picked up the Towards Zero script and then just went to town on it.
Absolutely.
It's so impressive.
Yes, it is.
But I think that makes it a strong film because the story's strong.
Oh, it is. And the screenplay's wonderful. To fit all that in there. They've got so many gags in there. I mean, really, you're getting a really bang for your buck when you're watching this for jokes.
And if it's been a while since you've watched it or you've never seen the
give
sequel,
it a go again.
Sit down.
Yeah, I was a bit afraid to watch it because I've got a lot of nice memories about it, so I didn't want it to be ruined. But it wasn't at all. I was laughing again. It was fantastic. And now for the second film, we're going to be talking about Buster Keaton's The General from 1926.
Well, this film is based on a true incident from the American Civil War, known as the Great Locomotive Chase of 1862. It was a military raid by volunteers from the Northern Union Army, blue uniforms, who stole a southern train called the General, and then used it to sabotage a vital rail line and its telegraph wires. The raiders were pursued by Southern Confederate forces, grey uniforms, on foot and then on a series of trains, including the Texas locomotive. But they were hamstrung by their inability to send warnings down the line due to the missing telegraph wires. Some of the raiders were the first to be awarded the US Congress Medal of Honor by President Lincoln. And the story was particularly well known in military families and became the basis of highly popular books. Buster Keaton's collaborator, Clyde Brookman, gave him a copy of one of these books, knowing that he had a thing about trains, and the two went on to co-write and direct this film. However, for some reason, Keaton didn't believe that his audience would accept Confederates as the bad guys. So he turned the story around to focus on a heroic Confederate train driver, Johnny Gray, played by him, who doggedly pursues the raiders to rescue his train, and, incidentally, his lover Annabelle Lee, played by Marion Mack. The film has an initial setup where Annabelle mistakenly believes that Johnny has refused to join the Confederate Army, because his role as a civilian train driver is seen as too vital to the cause, although no one bothers to tell him. So Annabelle tells Johnny that she cannot see him again until he is in uniform. A year later, she boards his train to visit her wounded soldier father on the battlefront. This train is the General, which the plainclothed raiders steal during a meal stop, not knowing that a suspicious Annabelle has climbed into one of the wagons. It's only Johnny who pursues this vital resource, at first on foot, then by handcart, and finally by commandeering another Confederate locomotive, the Texas. He follows deep into Union territory and discovers that the raiders have also taken Annabelle hostage. He rescues her and his beloved train, and they head back to warn the Confederate Army of an impending raid. You can see why Keaton was drawn to such a filmic story, and he makes the most of it. I've seen it 3 or 4 times now, including last week on the big screen with you, Ricardo. But I couldn't say whether I've seen the same film 3 or 4 times, as there are different versions floating around. If you get the chance, I highly recommend doing what we did to see the restored version, preferably in a cinema. While some DVD versions are longer, at around 1 3/4 hours, they're typically badly degraded with poorly matched musical soundtracks to make up for the lack of dialogue. As a result, they can seem like a distanced historical curiosity piece. And I can't for the life of me work out where that extra half hour is. But the restored version that we saw last week was a revelation. With its beautifully crisp black and white cinematography on the larger screen with a more fitting soundtrack, it came to life. And I felt like I was somehow gazing into an historical record or watching a painting. The most painterly sequence is in the middle, between train chases. Johnny is hiding under a table in the conspirator's house, with one eye peering out at Annabelle through a burnt hole in the tablecloth. To me, it feels like a Dali-esque image, and it's no surprise to have learnt recently that Dali was in fact a big fan of Buster Keaton. Full marks to Marion Mack, who puts up with a lot in a full-length crinoline dress, clambering across wagons, bound and passed across wagon tops, or bundled into a sack and generally flung around. She retired from acting 2 years later, as she found filming for long periods too much of a strain. For example, The General was filmed over 6 months in Oregon. The film was a flop that completely overran its budget. Its climax, where a Union locomotive falls through a burning bridge, is the most expensive single shot in silent film history. The film's failure was one of the key reasons that United Artists took production control away from Keaton, which eventually drove him to MGM just as sound films were taking off, against the advice of Charlie Chaplin and Harold Lloyd. At MGM, he was completely at the mercy of a highly structured bureaucratic system. His career lost its way, and he was overwhelmed for many years by personal problems. With the benefit of hindsight, I suspect that The General was misconceived for its time. It was only 60 years after the American Civil War, and Keaton chose to make the heroes of a cherished tale into the bad guys. And a joke about dying soldiers probably didn't help. Funny though it was. And he was known as a maker of comedies rather than dramas, despite always deftly combining the two. And The General is essentially an epic adventure with comic touches, and therefore didn't meet audience or reviewer expectations. It's only over time that it's found its true reputation. Watching this some years ago with my teenage nieces, I was both startled and pleased at how engrossed they were in the tale. It's charming from the outset, such as when a wooing Johnny gives his lover a serious-faced photo of himself with his beloved train. And I have many favourite scenes which we can discuss later. Now, this is a longer intro than I would normally do, perhaps, but I love Buster Keaton. Described recently in Dana Stevens' biography as this solemn, beautiful, perpetually airborne man. I couldn't agree more. In fact, this podcast episode has been a poorly disguised stratagem to get Ricardo to see his first ever Buster Keaton film. This is a moment. So, Ricardo, did you land well with Buster?
Oh, I did, and look, he's pretty amazing, and it's not as though I hadn't seen a full-length movie of Buster Keaton, but I'd seen a lot of Buster Keaton, if you know what I mean. There's been a lot of scenes watching The General, there was plenty of scenes in there which I had seen, the train crash or the train, the blowing up the bridge
which
and whatnot,
amazing.
which is amazing. And what is amazing about him, and the thing is, that I'm a very big Charlie Chaplin fan. So I think some people go, "Are you Keaton or are you Chaplin?" I marvel at Buster Keaton's physical comedy, and what he does is pretty amazing. What he does, and Chaplin never did that. See,
they're two sides of the same coin. I mean, they invented the art form.
Oh, they did. Yeah, they did. But one thing Charlie Chaplin has and did well was that it had a lot of heart and did his political, leanings in his films, did them very cleverly. Whereas in The General, maybe he didn't do them as cleverly with his political, what he was trying to say within that.
He got the politics wrong.
He got the wrong, yeah. And so I think, it sort of reminds me of when you look at Charlie Chaplin doing The Great Dictator, had something to say. It's still a very good film. And that's one film which got canned when it came out as well, but then found its audience later on, and people, called him a genius overnight with that.
Well, people wanted these players, writers, performers, to make them laugh. And when they try and do something a bit out of that kind of comfort zone, it's taken time for the audience to be found. But you're right. Look, Buster Keaton is a very subtle communicator with his, the famous stone face.
Yes.
And he communicates, I think, thought and emotion. But you're right, Chaplin's got the bigger portrayal of heart.
Absolutely.
You look at the one with the orphan.
The kid.
Yes, and the one we did, the Gold Rush.
Oh, there was the Gold Rush and the modern times as well.
Oh, that's right, yes.
So all of those sort of Chaplin films, he has this sort of heart to his work, which makes you feel. And I feel in a Chaplin film, whereas Keaton, I don't really feel that much, but I marvel at the physical.
Yeah, well, that quote, he's airborne. Do you know his vaudeville background?
No.
So he belonged to a performing family, himself and his mother and father. And his father, Joe Keaton, who is in this film, I think he plays the general at the end who gives him the uniform and the sword.
Oh, right.
Which is a nice touch. I know he's in it playing a general. I think that's the one they're referring to. So that's a really nice touch that his real life father is giving him the thing that recognises the role he's played, that he's a hero. But his father co-owned their travelling show with someone very famous, Harry Houdini.
Really?
Yes, and in fact, later in life, Keaton ended up in some kind of psychiatric facility when he was having problems and alcoholism and so on. And at one stage, he was put in a straitjacket, and he escaped from the straitjacket using a technique that Houdini had actually taught him.
Yeah, right.
So that was something I only found out when I was doing a bit of reading around this film.
Yeah.
I'd never known before, but that connection's kind of nice. But the routine that he started performing at the age of 3 was that his mother, for some reason, played the saxophone on the side of the stage, while Joe and young Buster, because he had the nickname from very young, were on centre stage, and he was disobeying the father, who ends up by throwing him around the theatre, against the scenery and the orchestra pit into the audience. And he even had a suitcase handle sewn into his clothes so his father could easily get a grab of him and fling him.
Oh, wow.
And he learnt to take those falls really well. He talked about how he actually did that. He was billed as the little boy who can't be damaged. But one thing that he learnt during that was he actually really enjoyed it, had a lot of fun, even though it looked quite dangerous. And he would sometimes laugh while it happened. And he realised that when he laughed, the audience stopped laughing. And that's when he developed this persona of the great stone face from those early years. So he doesn't show that emotion, maybe because of that history. He's a superb physical performer. When we saw The General last week, we also saw that short Cops performance, where there's that amazing scene, for example, where he's balanced on a ladder on top of a fence, and police at either end trying to grab hold of him. And there's other ones he's done where he just does these things you think, oh my God, how did he do it? Now, much as I love The General, I at least equally love Steamboat Bill Jr., which has the famous hurricane scenes in it, which are so well done and again show his physical prowess, like how he leans into or becomes the victim of the storm. And there's that famous scene where the house front falls down onto him, but there's a tiny window which lands perfectly around him, and if it didn't, he would have been killed. And he was injured, and other people were too on the making of The General, by the way. But so it's got the advantage.
It doesn't surprise me.
You can turn the camera off, so we don't see that stuff. What we do see almost blows your mind. These days you'd say, there were wires or there was CGI or something going on.
No, not back then.
No, exactly. What you see is what you get.
Absolutely. And this is one thing about silent cinema where which I marvel at, and that train sequence when they're towards the end, when they're on top of the train and this is all really done. That's really them. There's really extras in the background there. This is them on top of the train as it's moving really fast. This is not
when he's on the front of the cow catcher with the lumber.
Yes.
And he throws the lumber down to bounce another one out of the way before the train hits it.
Yes.
It's real.
It's real. And the thing is, it's like when I was watching D.W. Griffith's Intolerance, right? When you look at that and the Babylon sequences there, there's got massive walls, massive extras, huge things. Look like Lord of the Rings, the Two Towers, but this is real. Yep. There's people falling off those big things. This is real sets. That's when you watch, and please, listeners,
he's tied up in the dress and handed by men from the lower wood lumber wagon to the higher wagons.
Yeah.
That's really happening.
Yes.
She looks like she's pretty much bound, and these guys are kind of passing her up to each other.
And they're really doing that. This is
That's
why.
Part of what blows your mind.
This is why
it's real. It's real.
A silent film is still so wonderful, and any filmmakers out there or people, film enthusiasts, should really. I feel like silent film at the moment is dying quite a lot because not a lot of people are really going to see it or watch it. But I was quite surprised at the cinema last week that we weren't the only ones there.
No.
There were a few people in there, and I was really happy to see that.
But there wasn't a lot of laughter in the audience either.
No, there wasn't.
Me.
Yeah. There was chuckles.
Yeah, but it's not. But again, this film is not a laugh-out comedy. It's funny bits, funny touches.
No, when reading about it, apparently it's one of his least amount of laughs in this one.
But the film he was most proud of making, because he said, I took an historical story and turned it into a film. Whereas normally he was making up the plots
with the comedy and the action.
Yeah. So I'd like to go and see another of his films, one of his more comedy, capital C kind of films, with an audience still, to see how that plays. But you're right. There's a body of work that's kind of forgotten. And, so you throw in, Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, Lauren Hardy, Harold Lloyd.
But it's amazing with Harold Lloyd. There's the famous clock scene.
In Safety Last.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of people think that that's Buster Keaton.
Yeah, actually.
A lot of people think, that Buster Keaton with the guy on the clock. No, that's Harold Lloyd. Oh, who's Harold Lloyd? They don't know.
And the fact that those three were friends, Chaplin and Lloyd were saying to him, don't go to MGM. It's not going to work for you, But look, that's all forgotten. And did I mention Lauren Hardy, I think, and others? And I remember watching, again, we've talked about this before.
We have.
And I know people like Steven Spielberg have as well. That, back in the day, a lot before we had streaming and VCRs and so on, a lot of this was available on daytime TV.
Yes.
A lot of old movies, back to silent, but also, 1940s, 50s noir, whatever it might be. Not really anything that was foreign language, but otherwise you got exposed to kind of the back catalogue.
Yeah.
That's not as prevalent.
No, it's not anymore.
They don't surface in the streaming platforms. I've got most of the ones here in Australia, and you don't see these things. You see old movies, but an old movie is 1980s.
Yeah.
The specialist ones.
People are really missing out if you're not going to see them. I mean, you watch Modern Times, Chaplin, which we've done before, and it's... People, I think anybody who would watch that would be amazed by that. The General. I mean, this is...
Well, you showed me before the colorised version. Was it YouTube?
Yeah, it's on YouTube, the colorised version of the General.
And usually I'm not a fan of colorisation, but actually I don't mind it here.
No, and I remember I saw a colorised version of Modern Times as well.
How was it?
It was... Look, I quite like it. I love the black and white, but still, I don't mind it at all. But this film is... one of my favourite silent movies, but I marvel at it because I look at what they were doing, and some of the times I was sitting there going, "Wow! Look at this train sequence. This is amazing what they're doing here." And so again, I marvel at it and marvel about what they're doing. Again, I'm not feeling that much though, and that's what I look for. It's just part of what I look for.
So what would you give this?
I'd give it a 7.
Oh, really?
Out of 10, yeah.
I give it a 9.
Yep.
I think it's a masterpiece of its time. As I say, it took its time to find its audience, but it got there. I think So I think it was too trapped by its context of the recent history and the love for the story
Yep.
that I think he got wrong for his time.
Mm-hmm.
And also how he was perceived. You know, this is a big adventure story and it's told very, very well, but wasn't expected of him. But I think, I think it is a masterpiece or heading up that way. I agree with you, but it's not as strong on the emotion. I still do give a bit of an edge to Steamboat Bill Jr., probably because of its storm scenes and some of the things that happen
Well,
there.
I've got to check that one out now.
Yeah. But look, I think it's a solid 9. I really do. And I think, look, if you never see the whole film, you should at least watch the train crash scene. The fact that it's at 1926
Amazing.
blows my mind.
No models.
No.
No models.
And there was also that other great scene, earlier in the film. So there's the 2 chases. There's the chase into enemy territory, the rescue of Annabelle Lee,
Yes.
and then the return to their turf.
Turf, yeah.
And there's that scene where, though, in the first train chase where the Raiders train with Annabelle on board is very, very high on a bridge, dropping bits of lumber onto
Yes,
him
right, yeah.
on a track below. That's quite startling. And I also love the scene where he's busy chopping up lumber to put into the steam engine.
and he
And
keeps-
behind him,
Yes.
you see the routing of the Confederate Army
Yes.
and then the pursuit by the Union Army.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all going on behind his back. He's completely oblivious. I mean, there's some great sequences in it.
Oh, absolutely.
Just see for those.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think you've got to see it. I'm surprised I hadn't seen it, and I'm surprised that I'm really surprised I haven't seen that much Buster Keaton. Really, it's just one of those things I haven't sort of done because I'm so fast. I love Chaplin so much. I think it's his catalogue. I was really.
I sat down earlier today to just refamiliarise myself with the flow of the story,
Mm.
and I was surprised at how badly visually degraded the print I've got on DVD is.
Yeah,
I've actually
right.
now ordered a more up-to-date version because it's so beautiful what we saw.
It was. The restoration was
music,
beautiful.
They're playing all this music just to fill the space, and it just doesn't work.
Definitely see it. If you can see it in the cinema, do it.
Okay, so we've done planes. We've done trains. And now, big surprise, drum roll, automobiles. So, Ricardo, please tell us about 1971's automobiles film, Duel.
Directed by a young 24-year-old Steven Spielberg, this 1971 film, Duel, was actually made as a TV movie. It's a thrilling ride centering around a pretty simple storyline. David Mann, Dennis Weaver, is just a regular family guy on his way to an important appointment. On the way, he passes a slow-moving, rusty tanker truck. The driver somehow takes offence and starts playing mind games with David, devoting the rest of his day trying to kill him. It's a game of cat and mouse, with the truck teasing David to pass him, only to prevent him when he tries. This happens over and over again to the point where David literally cannot get out of the situation he is in. Even trying to call the police or waving down help becomes impossible. It really is a non-stop thrill ride that quite possibly is the best car chase film ever. Up there with 1971, same year, Vanishing Point, which this film did remind me of. Interestingly, Spielberg did hire 50-year-old stunt veteran Carey Lofton as his stunt coordinator. Lofton, who also played the driver, designed the legendary car chase sequences in Vanishing Point and also 1968's Bullet.
Oh.
To make the truck and cars seem like they're going at high speeds, Spielberg shot both vehicles at low angles, and these are amazing shots. He also made the specially made camera car from the 1968 Steve McQueen classic thriller Bullet, which could lower the camera to only 6 inches off the ground. Now, this story is always seen from David's point of view. We hear his thoughts and follow him. We never see the truck driver ever, just his arm. The truck itself is an old, rusty, ugly, and quite terrifying, really. And Spielberg actually auditioned 7 different styles of semi-trucks for this film before finally settling on the 1955 Peterbilt 281. Apparently, because it had a split windshield, rounded lights, and elongated hood, which made the front of the truck look like a face. Look, this is a really tight, taut, brilliantly made thriller made by a director that would become one of the greatest ever. Greg, what did you think?
You didn't mention there's actually two different versions of this film.
Oh, there is. Hang on a minute. There is a.
So there was one made for TV. It was a telly movie originally.
That's right.
When Dennis Weaver was just becoming famous for the McCloud TV series, which I can just about remember.
Yep.
And it was very successful, and they decided to do a cinema release. And so they filmed some additional scenes to flesh it out.
They did.
For the cinema. So the conversation with his wife fairly early on is new. The whole sequence, which I find a bit of a weird sequence with the school bus, is new for that as well.
That is new for that. Yes, it is.
So there are the two versions, and I, probably like you, watched the longer version.
Yeah, so did I.
The school bus.
Yes.
I think you can get the other version on YouTube if you want to watch that. But, look, I didn't love this film.
Really?
No, we chose this film, against the theme of, planes, trains and automobiles.
Yeah.
Because a friend of mine, Rob, hello Rob, said how much he loved this film. And, he thought it was, I don't know, maybe a perfect film, but certainly a very, very good film for him that he watches again and again and again.
Yeah.
And I'd never seen it before. Had you seen it before?
Years ago.
No, I'd seen little moments, I think, somewhere.
Years ago. But again, it was like me watching it for the first time.
To me, this kind of feels like a proof of concept film for where Spielberg was heading. So it was his first feature film. The moment in the school bus sequence where you see the truck almost brooding at the far end of the tunnel, you know it's around somewhere, and he knows it's probably around somewhere.
Yeah.
And then it's suddenly just there. Reminded me of the shark in Jaws. Now, confession, I haven't seen Jaws. But
me too. I actually could see where he was going to go with Jaws. I saw it.
And the other thing that is really apparent in the film, and I have to say I had the virtue of watching this with subtitles on, but there's a very strong theme running through this about, being a man. So you've got what's a fairly common Spielberg motif of the absent dad. You have a dad who's off elsewhere working, traveling on the road. So in Gremlins, for example, there's the inventor dad who's usually away at conventions, whatever else. In E.T., I don't know if the father even exists, but there's usually an absent dad. And here we're kind of seeing the other side of that story, which is dad on the road. And because I had the subtitles on, I was able to actually understand what was playing on his radio.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so there's, at first, it's just like boring kind of stuff. So, it's when he's in the suburbs and the city, it's about, weather, sports, ads, and so on. Then it moves into a prank call about manliness. Did you pick that up?
No, I didn't
Once
pick that up.
Once he's out in the wilds, wherever he is, there is someone doing one of those prank calls that is still one of the mainstays of commercial radio, where the DJ is ringing some sort of government office about some form and having a discussion that becomes a bit more aggressive as it goes about whether he's really the head of the house or whether he's basically been emasculated by his wife. And then you have the scene, at least in the longer version, where you've got the Dennis Weaver character who's called Dave Mann, bit of a giveaway.
Yep.
The everyman or just, man who's having the argument with his wife or trying to make up after an argument with his wife.
That's right.
Because he hasn't defended her honour. Some guy made a pass at her at a party and she doesn't feel he defended her well enough for that. So there's quite a bit going on about,
It's very light on, though. I mean, it's there. Yeah.
And then the film becomes about this duel between two men, between brute force and something that's trying to be a bit more agile or cunning. So again, I don't want to overclaim it, but I think it's certainly there that there's this underlying story about this. And what's really interesting is that when, probably don't want to spoil the ending too much, but when Dave triumphs, he does this kind of excited little capering, skipping dance.
Yeah, he does.
Like a little boy
Yeah.
at his victory. And then he kind of sits down, doesn't quite know what to do with himself when he's best. It's kind of a David and Goliath story when you think about it.
Oh, it is.
And David triumphs over Goliath and then doesn't seem to quite know what to do with it. So I think there's more going on in this than, just the duel itself. But
there is a scene, though. There is a scene which I really loved. It was the cafe scene when, he's not knowing. There's the truck's pulled out the front of this cafe, sort of a fuel stop.
So the driver's obviously inside this cafe.
Yeah, and he's trying to work out. And we've seen from before. We've seen some boots of the driver, and so he's trying to work out which boots, whether they all match the driver. And Oh, it was very well done, that scene. It was beautifully done. Great suspense.
Well, I was quite tense when he goes, because there's a long tracking shot when he goes down to the bathroom and washes his face. And it's around then you start to get the stream of consciousness voiceover kind of thing.
Yeah, which I don't know works that well.
I think it was just to give it some dialogue.
Yeah, I know, but I don't think it needed it.
But and then he goes back, and then he sees the truck outside, and then he realises he has no idea who was there beforehand. So he doesn't know which of these people might be the truck driver. But I got a bit tense when he's walking down to the bathroom. I actually half expected the truck to drive through the cafe and just miss him or something. Like, I was a bit on edge at that stage. But it wasn't really the cat and mouse parts on the highway that engaged me. It was more about the threat of this unknown shark from Jaws kind of character that's not rational. Like, he does kind of show him off in the early part of the film when the duel actually starts at about the 15-minute mark. And so there's a bit of provocation, but not that really, earns what develops. And so the truck driver is basically irrational, and yet with that added sequence of the school bus, the truck actually does something nice.
I know,
like
absolutely,
it's out to psychopathically destroy the Dave Mann character.
That's right.
But it stops to help push start the school bus, full of the most obnoxious movie kids I've ever seen.
Yeah, that's right.
And a pretty, delinquent bus driver
as
well.
That's right.
If I may say so. I wasn't get too upset that the kids didn't come out well from the story. But the thing is, the truck driver stops and he helps. And then he goes back on the hunt.
Well, not showing the driver at all is really quite good. It's powerful. But I kept reminding myself about the movie Christine, about the car with the
Stephen King one. I haven't seen it,
which is really good. That's another fave of mine. I love Christine, so I kept reminding me of that as well. But I mean, I think the driving sequences are beautifully shot. They really are, and for its time, you can just really see his vision there, and the way he used the camera and the craft, and the way he set up suspense in those scenes.
Well, even when he's in the phone booth in the middle of all those rattlesnake pages, suddenly I thought, I know what's going to happen. You suddenly realise, because of the way the shot was set up,
exactly
how vulnerable he was.
That's right.
In that kind of standalone coffin, really.
Yes.
But did you notice the really clumsy shot at that point? You must have.
Hang on, which one?
So when he's standing in the phone booth, trying to ring, and suddenly you see the film crew reflected in the glass.
Oh, I didn't see that.
Maybe I didn't see that. Spielberg.
I didn't see that.
Oh, I just thought, really? You've actually not only made this film, you've come back and made it again. You couldn't reshoot that or just cut it out or something?
Yeah, I'll have to look back at it now. I was too into it.
It broke the illusion.
Oh, to me, I was in the movie, so I just I didn't really notice it. I just I thought this truck's coming, and oh my god, what's going to happen? Apparently, there's one sequence at the end. I'm not going to go into it, but he only had one take to do it in, Spielberg, to get it done.
Is this kind of the climax scene?
Yeah.
I just thought that was beautifully filmed.
It was.
It was one sustained take.
Yes.
And for what it was showing, and it's not normally my kind of thing, but for what it was showing, it was really quite beautiful.
Oh, it was. And I won't go into it too much, but it's the studio, when they saw a version of it, wanted to do it another way. And Spielberg said, if you want to go refilm that scene, get another director. I'm not doing it.
Oh, okay.
And got away with it to keep it the way it was. But in terms of the way those sequences were shot, it's all real. They're driving those cars, and there's no models there or any green screen or whatnot. They really shot that on location. And so that's another thing to marvel at again. And I think this is why it reminded me of Vanishing Point, because it's very similar to that. But then Tarantino makes Death Proof, and that has some amazing car sequences in there as well, which he really did. And you had his stunt woman on the cars and whatnot, and tried to replicate that sort of energy in Death Proof, which I thought was it's one of the more maligned Tarantino films, but I actually quite like it.
I just want to come back to that moment, the Voldemort moment, the moment that shall not be named.
Yes.
Did you notice the sound effect?
Now that you mention it, I actually didn't think about it as it was happening, but now that you've mentioned it, I know what that sound effect is. I know what you're talking about.
And what is it?
A whale?
It's the roar of a dinosaur, taken from a 1957 B movie called The Land Unknown.
Oh, my God.
And Spielberg...
A whale.
Yep. Well, big creature, you're not
yes,
far wrong.
Yeah, not
apparently this dinosaur roar sound effect, which is used in the key moment in Duel, is also used in Jaws when the shark's carcass sinks into the ocean.
Oh, really?
And Spielberg said, and this goes back to what we were saying earlier, Spielberg says he did this because he thinks, I'm quoting here, there's a kinship between Duel and Jaws because they're both about these leviathans targeting an everyman.
Yes.
So he's making a thematic, like a pretty subtle, but a thematic link between these two films in the way that I was picking up in terms of the lurking in the tunnel.
Yes,
scene.
yes.
That's, quite apparent. As you say, you can see where he's going, that, Jaws is the logical choice that comes next.
I watched this by myself, and I can't wait to watch it with my son. I can't wait to watch this one.
Were you scared?
No, I was thrilled.
Okay.
Different.
So, for our automobiles film, Duel.
I want to know what you're giving it first.
What do you think I'm going to give it?
I don't know.
Go on, have a guess.
No, I'd like to know. 6.
7.
Oh, well done.
Oh, gee, thank you, patronising bastard. Yeah, look, I gave it a 7 out of 10.
Yes.
Because to me, look, it's not my genre, but I can see the skill, and I can see where Spielberg's going thematically and in terms of execution as well.
Mm-hmm. God, what a talent.
There's a lot... Oh, well, God, yes, yeah.
Jeepers.
It's almost a cliche, but
wow.
absolutely.
I mean, to make that at 24.
Yep.
I mean...
For what was basically like the telemovie of the week.
Yes. Oh.
But he saw his opportunity. He just went for it.
He's amazing.
So, what are you giving?
8.
Oh, well done.
Yes. You patronising bastard. So, yes, an 8 out of 10. Yes, I really enjoyed it. And again, it's a film I thought might have dated quite a bit, but it didn't.
Yep.
For all of these films, really, except for The General, obviously, that's dated a little bit. But
Flying High's dated a little bit.
A little
parts,
bit, but not as much as I thought.
Yeah.
And even with The General, I mean, those sequences with the train are to be marvelled at.
Well, actually, I don't think The General has dated. I think Fly High has little, and this has a little bit.
Oh, well, it's a silent film, so it's dated a bit, but it's okay. But
are you talking anachronism?
Yes.
Datedness?
Yes. Well, the restored version.
Well done.
The restored version.
Well done, that boy.
So that concludes our planes, trains, and how many times are we going to say this, automobiles episode?
Yeah, they couldn't call it planes, trains and cars.
No, they couldn't. That concludes this episode.
That's an easier way of saying it.
That is.
Let's talk about our next episode.
Sure.
Now, there are certain film critics, movie reviewers that you and I really love.
Yes.
On the local level, there's Margaret Pomerantz and David Stratton.
Love them.
We'll have to talk about one day, but they're, if you like, our idols, our benchmark. Mm-hmm. And another one is American film reviewer Leonard Maltin, that you and I both grew up with.
Yes.
And I know other people have their other favourites like Roger Ebert, who's not that well known in Australia.
Yeah.
But Leonard Maltin, because of his book of movie reviews and so on, was almost like a handbook or Bible.
Well, I used to have the movie.
We used to get the book pretty much every year.
Yeah, I had that one and the Hallowells as well, so there was a bit of a different.
I had Hallowells, but I never really got into it. But Leonard Maltin was the one.
Leonard Maltin was the better one because Hallowells was like, he really couldn't stand a lot of films. It was just the classics, and I got really frustrated. Like, he'd give no stars to really good films, and I go, "What are you doing?" But Leonard Maltin had a really great perspective on movies.
Yes, and not as well known here in Australia as he was very well known in places like the States. But you and I certainly. And so in tribute to Mr. Maltin, or Leonard, if we can be so imbued with the honour.
That's right.
We came across an episode on a different podcast, which is, again, quite a well-known movie podcast called The Movies That Made Me, and where they had kind of an interview conversation with Leonard Maltin about 10 films that he thought were sleepers. Mm-hmm. One from each decade of the history of the movies, and why he thought that they were films that should be rediscovered. And we thought, okay, well, let's find out.
That's right.
Now, we don't do 10 movies at a time.
No.
So tempting though that might be for us, but not our listeners. So we chose 3 of those from across the decades, where we thought, well, let's go and look at these sleepers and see what we think of them. So a bit of cheek perhaps, and with maybe a bit of apologies to Alice, Mrs. Moulton, we've called the next episode Sleeping with Leonard.
Yes, we have. And so one of the films we're going to discuss is one of the ones he was discussing was The Last Command from 1928.
Which is a silent film, and I know how much you love silent films.
I do.
So we're quite keen to see this film we've never heard of. You know, it's not good old Buster Keaton like in this episode, or Charlie Chaplin or anyone. So it's a bit of a branch out for us.
Yep.
And then the next one we're going to do is a 1987 film called The House of Games.
Oh, another one I haven't seen either. So
I saw when it came out at the movies, but a long time ago. Like that's, heading towards 35, 40 years ago, or close to 40 years ago. And so to go back and look at that, and for you to see a film for the first time, which is David Mamet, who's quite a literate, well-known writer and filmmaker.
Yes, absolutely. And then we're going to do the 1960 sort of forgotten Disney classic, Pollyanna.
Yeah.
So that
Hayley Mills.
That's right.
And some well-known of the time Hollywood actors. It's a film that I thought I had seen, because when I was growing up, there'd be Disney classic books, and I saw like photo stories out of it perhaps, but never actually seen it.
There's a lot of reference to Pollyanna in a lot of different films as well.
And the response by one of the hosts of the Movies That Made Me podcast to Leonard Maltin's choice of this film was like so enthused. We thought, all right, well, it's one of those films, like you say, has been forgotten. But let's go and see what we think of it.
Yeah, it's going to be really enjoyable. I'm looking forward to that one as well.
So if you're out there, Mr. Moulton, we are both currently, bowing in your general direction.
So thank you so much for listening to
Planes, Trains and Automobiles
episode. Thank you so much for listening. Please follow our podcast on social media, TikTok, Instagram.
And we're heading towards Christmas, so, great present for us. Subscribe, tell your friends, the usual kind of stuff.
And Christmas is coming.
Ho, ho, ho.